People love to talk about gold, silver, crypto. Which asset survives the crash? Which currency holds value? Which investment keeps you afloat when everything else goes sideways? But here's the thing. If a real collapse happens, none of that matters as much as what you can actually use. History has proven it over and over again. When supply chains break, when governments fail, when store shelves go empty, the things that keep you alive become the new currency. Not yellow metal, not digital wallets. Today, we're looking at the 10 products that'll be worth more than gold when the collapse happens. Number 10, clean water filtration systems and purification tablets. Let's start with the obvious one, because as obvious as it is, most people are still completely unprepared for it. The human body can survive roughly 3 weeks without food. Without water, you're looking at 3 days, maybe less in heat. That's not a survival tip. That's biology. And when infrastructure collapses, water treatment plants shut down, pipes carry contaminated water, and rivers and lakes become a gamble you really don't want to take. In Venezuela, during the economic collapse that intensified around 2016, tap water became unsafe across large parts of the country. People were boiling water in neighborhoods that had electricity, which wasn't always. Those who had filtration systems or purification tablets had something that many people would trade nearly anything for. Not gold, not cash, clean water. The Sawyer squeeze filter, to give you a concrete example, can filter up to 100,000 gallons of water before it needs replacing. Right now, it costs about $30. In a collapse scenario, that $30 item becomes worth considerably more than its price tag suggests. Same goes for iodine tablets, ceramic gravity filters, and even basic bleach-based purification methods. A few drops of unscented household bleach per gallon of water is a method the CDC has recommended for emergency disinfection for decades. And this isn't a doomsday fantasy. Boil water advisories happen every single year in the United States, even in modern developed cities. Jackson, Mississippi had a full-scale water infrastructure crisis in 2022 that left residents without safe running water for weeks. The difference between a localized crisis and a national one is mostly scale, not kind. When the scale expands, the calculus on clean water changes entirely. Ceramic gravity filters like the Berkey or the Dalton system work without electricity, can filter thousands of gallons, and remove bacteria, protozoa, and most chemical contaminants. They're the kind of thing that makes you completely indifferent to whatever is coming out of the municipal tap. If you have one stored and maintained, you have something genuinely valuable in a world where clean water is no longer guaranteed. It's also worth thinking about water sources before you need them. Identifying the nearest natural water source to your home, a creek, a river, a pond, a spring, and having the means to treat it is fundamentally different from assuming the faucet will always work. Rainwater collection is legal in most US states and can be set up with basic barrel systems that capture runoff from a roof. In a dry climate, a simple rain catchment setup on a house with a metal roof can collect hundreds of gallons from a single storm. Combined with filtration, that's a water supply that doesn't depend on anything running correctly downstream. Number 9, antibiotics and basic medical supplies. In the developed world, we have become almost entirely dependent on just-in-time pharmaceutical supply chains. Most hospitals keep roughly 3 days' worth of critical medications on hand. Most pharmacies operate on a model where stock is replenished weekly. When that chain breaks, it breaks fast, and the consequences are severe. Infections that were death sentences before the 20th century, strep throat, infected wounds, urinary tract infections, pneumonia, become death sentences again without antibiotics. That's not an exaggeration. Prior to the introduction of penicillin in the 1940s, a simple cut that got infected could kill you. A tooth abscess could kill you. Childbirth could kill you from postpartum infection at a rate that would seem unthinkable today. During World War II, penicillin was so scarce that military surgeons collected it from patients' urine to reuse it. That's the reality of a world without reliable pharmaceutical supply chains. It sounds extreme until it doesn't. Fish antibiotics, the same chemical compounds as human antibiotics in many cases, have been stockpiled by preppers for years. Amoxicillin, ciprofloxacin, and metronidazole in their fish antibiotic form are widely available without a prescription, and have a relatively long shelf life when stored in cool, dry, dark conditions. This is not medical advice, but it is a documented reality of what serious preparedness communities have been doing for a long time. Beyond antibiotics, basic wound care supplies become enormously valuable when professional medical care is unavailable. Surgical sutures, antiseptic solution, tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, sterile bandages, and splinting material. In Argentina's 2001 financial collapse, pharmacies and hospitals ran out of medicine and basic supplies almost immediately. Hospitals were turning patients away for lack of syringes and gauze. A BMJ report from that period documented that hospitals had no medication or treatments and were calling on the public to pool whatever drugs they had for patients with AIDS, cancer, and organ transplants who needed specific medications to stay alive. A note on shelf life worth knowing. A study commissioned by the FDA, called the Shelf Life Extension Program, found that many medications retain their potency well beyond their printed expiration dates when stored properly. Some antibiotics stored in cool, dry, sealed conditions maintained effectiveness for years past the label date. The expiration date is a manufacturer's guarantee, not a hard cutoff on the medication's actual chemistry. The broader point is this: in a world where getting to a hospital or pharmacy is no longer straightforward, the household that has even a basic medical capability, wound care, infection treatment, pain management, fever reduction, has a significant survival advantage over one that doesn't. And that capability has real trade value in any community trying to organize itself after a collapse. Number 8, heirloom seeds. This is the one that separates people who've thought about this seriously from people who think a closet full of canned beans is a survival plan. Canned food runs out. Seeds, if you know what you're doing, don't. The critical distinction here is between heirloom and open pollinated seeds versus hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds, the kind sold in most big box garden centers, are bred for uniformity and yield, but they don't breed true. Save the seeds from a hybrid tomato and plant them next year, and what you get is unpredictable. Heirloom varieties, on the other hand, produce offspring identical to the parent plant. Save this year's seeds, plant them next year, get the same results. Repeat indefinitely. During the siege of Leningrad in World War II, Soviet scientists at the Vavilov Institute of Plant Industry made one of the most remarkable choices in the history of agriculture. They were sitting on one of the largest and most diverse seed collections in the world, thousands of varieties of wheat, rice, potatoes, and other crops. And as the siege starved the city, some of those scientists chose to die of hunger rather than eat what they were protecting. They understood that those seeds represented the genetic diversity of an entire agricultural civilization, something that couldn't be replaced. Those seeds were the future. The scientists understood that in a way most people today simply don't. A sentiment echoed repeatedly by historians studying the Vavilov collection, a basic heirloom seed collection covering staple crops. Beans, corn, squash, kale, tomatoes, carrots, radishes, and sunflowers can be stored in sealed, moisture-proof, airtight containers in a cool environment for years. Organizations like Seed Savers Exchange have been preserving these varieties for decades and make them widely accessible. A complete starter collection costs under $50 and fits in a shoebox. The value here goes beyond personal survival. In a prolonged collapse, seeds become trade currency. The person in a community with reliable, productive, proven seed stock has something that no amount of gold can substitute, because gold doesn't grow food. Number 7, fuel and fuel alternatives. Gasoline and diesel have obvious and immediate value in any collapse scenario. Everyone understands that. But the longer-term picture is more nuanced than just filling up extra gas cans and calling it a day. Liquid fuel powers generators, farm equipment, chainsaws, water pumps, and transportation. In the immediate aftermath of a major disruption, fuel disappears remarkably fast. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, gas stations across Louisiana and Mississippi ran dry within 72 hours. People waited in multi-hour lines for whatever remained, and stations that still had fuel became de facto community hubs. In a collapse that's national rather than regional, that situation doesn't resolve in a week. Properly treated and stored gasoline, using a fuel stabilizer like STA bill, can last up to 2 years. Diesel stored correctly lasts even longer. Propane is arguably the superior stockpile fuel for most household purposes because it stores indefinitely when kept in proper sealed tanks, remains stable across a wide temperature range, and doesn't degrade the way liquid petroleum does. But here's the part most people don't know about: wood gasifiers. A gasifier is a device that converts wood, agricultural waste, or other biomass into combustible gas, called syngas or producer gas, which can power standard internal combustion engines with minor modifications. During World War II, when petroleum was rationed or simply unavailable across occupied and blockaded Europe, wood gasifiers became widespread. Sweden, Germany, Finland, and Denmark all ran significant wood gasifier programs as a direct response to fuel scarcity, with hundreds of thousands of vehicles across Europe running on them by the early 1940s. The technology was well documented enough that in 1989, FEMA published a detailed manual on how to build one for use in a petroleum emergency. The practical implication for a modern collapse is significant. If you have wood and access to a gasifier, you have fuel, indefinitely. People with that knowledge and equipment become essential to any functioning community trying to operate vehicles, generators, or farm equipment beyond the first few months. Number 6. Hand tools and manual equipment. Power tools are great until the power goes out and stays out, and then they're very expensive paperweights. Manual hand tools, the kind your grandparents used before everything came with a cord or a battery, become disproportionately valuable in a world without reliable electricity. This isn't just about carpentry. It's about every system that currently runs on power. A hand crank grain mill allows you to turn stored wheat or corn into flour without any electricity. A manual water pump can pull water from a well at depths of 25 feet or more. A non-electric wood-burning cook stove with a proper draft system heats food and a home simultaneously. These aren't exotic items. They're the tools that kept households functioning for most of human history, and they still work exactly as well today. Consider the cast iron hand pump specifically. Before municipal water systems existed, every farm had one. They're still manufactured today by companies like Bison and Simple Pump. They last generations with minimal maintenance, a leather seal here, a new check valve there, and they require absolutely nothing except human effort to operate. If you have a well and one of these pumps, you have water independent of electricity, independent of municipal infrastructure, independent of everything except the aquifer beneath you. The same principle applies to canning equipment. A quality pressure canner allows you to safely preserve meat, beans, vegetables, and broth for years without refrigeration. Before the electric refrigerator became a household standard in the mid-20th century, canning was simply how food was kept. The knowledge of how to do it safely, botulism is a genuine and serious risk in improperly canned low-acid foods, is as valuable as the equipment itself. Axes, draw knives, chisels, hand saws, files for sharpening them, and a good anvil and vise represent the kind of capability that allows a person to build, repair, and maintain the physical world around them without plugging anything in. It's worth noting that quality hand tools from the mid-20th century, Diston hand saws, Stanley bench planes, Greenlee punches, are often superior in steel quality to modern equivalents. Thrift stores and estate sales are quietly full of them, often for a few dollars apiece. Sharpening equipment deserves its own mention here. A dull tool is nearly useless. A set of quality sharpening stones, a coarse diamond stone for reshaping edges, a medium Arkansas stone for refining, and a leather strop for finishing, can maintain every cutting edge you own indefinitely. The ability to sharpen a blade properly is a skill that takes an afternoon to learn and pays dividends for the rest of your life. In a community navigating a collapse, the person who can sharpen tools that others have allowed to go dull is providing a service that people will compensate for. Number 5. Salt. Salt sounds almost embarrassingly simple for a list like this. It's been sitting in a shaker on your table your whole life, available at the grocery store for under $1 a pound. But for the vast majority of human history, it was one of the most strategically important commodities on Earth. And the reasons for that don't disappear just because we've made it cheap. Salt preserves food. Before refrigeration existed, salt was the primary method of keeping meat, fish, and vegetables from spoiling. Salted cod fed European populations through winters for centuries. Salted pork was a dietary staple for armies and navies across the world. The Roman army paid soldiers partly in salt. That's where the word salary derives from. Medieval trade routes were constructed around salt production centers. Wars were fought over salt mines. In a collapse scenario, refrigeration becomes unreliable or non-existent. Suddenly, salt goes from a pantry afterthought to a survival tool with no substitute. A 50-pound bag of non-iodized canning and pickling salt costs roughly $10 today and stores indefinitely when kept dry. There is no expiration date. It doesn't degrade, it doesn't require rotation, and it doesn't take up much space relative to its value. Beyond food preservation, salt is essential for livestock feeding as a mineral supplement, leather tanning, certain types of homemade soap production, and wound irrigation. It's one of those items where the more you think about how it was actually used throughout history, the more obvious its value becomes. North Korean defectors have described salt as one of the most valued barter commodities in the informal black market economy that operates alongside the state's food rationing system. When government distribution fails and people revert to trading what actually matters, salt consistently appears near the top of the list. 100 pounds of it, stored in sealed, waterproof containers, is one of the most cost-effective and lowest-maintenance preparedness investments a person can make. It takes up minimal space, requires zero upkeep, never goes bad, and covers food preservation, animal husbandry, sanitation, and barter simultaneously. If there is a single item on this entire list that delivers the most value per dollar spent and per square foot of storage space, salt is a legitimate candidate for that title. Number 4. Distilled spirits and high-proof alcohol. Not for drinking. Well, not only for drinking. High-proof distilled alcohol is a multi-purpose commodity that has functioned as currency during virtually every major collapse, wartime shortage, or economic breakdown in recorded history. The reasons are both practical and psychological, and both matter. On the practical side, ethanol above 60% concentration is a highly effective antiseptic. It denatures bacterial proteins and destroys the lipid membranes of many viruses. It was used extensively in field medicine long before commercially produced antiseptics existed, and it remains on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines today. In a world without reliable pharmacy access, a bottle of high-proof grain alcohol has direct medical utility. On the barter side, alcohol has a psychological and social demand that doesn't disappear in a crisis. It arguably increases. Prohibition in the United States didn't reduce demand for alcohol. It made illegal alcohol one of the most profitable commodities in American history. People will trade significant value for it under stress, which is exactly when barter economies emerge. Post-Soviet Russia provides a more recent and well-documented example. When the USSR collapsed in the early 1990s, and the ruble became unreliable, vodka briefly functioned as de facto currency in parts of Russia and Ukraine. Factory workers were sometimes paid in vodka when cash was unavailable. It had a known stable value that the national currency didn't. In the early 1990s, vodka was more reliable than the ruble in some transactions, documented in multiple economic histories of the Soviet collapse period. For practical storage, miniature 50-milliliter bottles are useful for barter because they're portion-controlled and tamper-evident. Full bottles of high-proof spirits like Everclear, 190-proof grain alcohol, are the practical choice for antiseptic use. Distilled spirits stored in sealed glass bottles don't expire. A bottle of vodka from 1970 is chemically identical to one bottled last week. Number 3. Ham radios and communication equipment. When the internet goes down and cell towers lose power or become overloaded, the communication infrastructure that most people have taken for granted their entire lives vanishes. And with it goes the ability to know what's happening, where help is, where danger is, and where resources are available. This is where radio comes back, not as a nostalgic hobby, but as critical infrastructure. Ham radio operators, amateur radio license holders, maintain a global network of frequencies, repeater stations, and emergency protocols specifically designed to function when everything else has failed. During Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in 2017, ham radio operators became the primary means of communication between parts of the island and the mainland. For days after the storm destroyed standard infrastructure, hospitals used them to coordinate. Search and rescue teams used them. They were the last thing working when everything else went dark. FEMA has repeatedly and formally acknowledged amateur radio as a critical backup communication system. After Hurricane Katrina, ham operators were coordinating rescue and relief information before the agency's own communication systems were fully functional. This isn't a fringe prepper claim, it's documented in official after-action reports. A basic entry-level setup, a Baofeng UV5R handheld transceiver, and a technician class license costs under $30 for the radio and requires a single weekend of study to pass the licensing exam. More robust setups involving HF, high-frequency transceivers, allow communication across continents without any relay infrastructure whatsoever, using only atmospheric skip propagation, nothing to maintain, nothing to pay for, nothing to break down between you and the person you're talking to. Shortwave receivers, even without a transmit license, allow anyone to receive news, weather, and information broadcasts from around the world. During World War II, people in Nazi-occupied Europe gathered around shortwave sets to receive BBC broadcasts from London. That technology works exactly the same way today. The information it provides, where food distribution is happening, which roads are passable, where medical assistance is available, has real practical value that's hard to overstate. One more practical note: battery-powered or hand-crank emergency radios that receive AM, FM, and weather band broadcasts are a separate but complementary category. No AA weather radio broadcasts 24 hours a day on dedicated frequencies and carries emergency alerts, hazard warnings, and public safety information. A $30 hand-crank emergency radio, the kind that can also charge a phone via USB, is one of the most overlooked and undervalued pieces of preparedness equipment available. In a collapse, the person with a working radio and the knowledge to use it is the most informed person in any room. Information has always been power. In a crisis, it's survival. Number 2, manual food production knowledge and equipment. Knowing how to do something is worth more than owning the tools if you don't understand them. But ideally, you have both, because in a collapse, the ability to produce food without industrial inputs becomes one of the most fundamentally valuable capabilities a person can have. Beekeeping is one of the clearest examples. A productive hive produces honey, a natural sweetener and preservative with an essentially indefinite shelf life. Archaeologists have found honey in Egyptian tombs dating back over 3,000 years that was still technically edible. A hive also produces beeswax, which has dozens of uses: candle making, wood and leather conditioning, food wrapping, waterproofing, and as a lubricant for tools and mechanisms. 2 hives, basic equipment, and a year of practical experience put someone in a genuinely useful and tradable position. Fermentation is another skill with enormous practical value that requires essentially no industrial inputs. Sourdough bread requires nothing but flour, water, and time. Lacto-fermented vegetables, sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, require nothing but vegetables, salt, and a jar. Vinegar fermentation produces a cleaning agent, a preservative, and a cooking ingredient simultaneously. These processes don't require electricity, specialized equipment, or supply chains. They require knowledge. Grain milling is underrated in preparedness discussions. Wheat berries stored in sealed 5-gallon buckets with oxygen absorbers have a documented shelf life of 25 to 30 years. Pre-ground flour, by contrast, lasts 6 to 12 months under ideal conditions and far less under poor ones. If you have stored wheat berries and a hand mill, you can produce fresh flour indefinitely. That's not a minor difference. Soap making from lye, derived from wood ash, and rendered animal fat was standard household chemistry for most of human history before commercial soap existed. Soap is not a luxury item. It is a disease prevention tool. The reduction in infectious disease mortality in the 19th and 20th centuries is attributed in large part to the spread of basic sanitation, of which soap is a cornerstone. In a collapse where cholera, dysentery, and wound infections become real risks again, soap-making knowledge has genuine survival value. Each of these skills, beekeeping, fermentation, grain milling, soap making, and the basic equipment to practice them, represents durable, lasting value that has absolutely nothing to do with market conditions or what the dollar is doing. Number 1. Quality footwear and durable clothing. This one is almost always left off these lists, and it's a serious oversight every single time. In a collapse scenario, particularly one involving displacement, civil unrest, or the need to cover significant distances on foot without reliable transportation, footwear becomes critical in a way that's easy to underestimate until you're actually walking on damaged feet. The US military invests substantial research into footwear because inadequately protected feet disable soldiers. Trench foot, blisters that progress to infections, and ankle injuries from inadequate lateral support have historically removed more combatants from effectiveness than direct enemy action in certain conflicts. That's not a detail. It's a lesson that's been learned repeatedly and expensively. Leather boots with Vibram-style rubber soles, properly maintained with mink oil or neat's foot oil, can last decades of hard use. A basic cobbler's toolkit, leather awls, waxed thread, contact cement, and replacement soles allows a knowledgeable person to repair footwear rather than replace it. In a world where new boots aren't available, the ability to resole a good pair is the difference between functional footwear and none. Wool socks are underrated to a degree that's almost comic until you understand the material properties. Merino wool regulates temperature across a wide range, resists odor bacteria, and critically, retains its insulating properties when wet. Cotton, by contrast, loses nearly all insulating value when damp and stays wet for a long time. In cold, wet conditions, cotton socks are actively dangerous. A supply of quality wool socks is a barter item that people in difficult conditions would appreciate deeply and trade real value for. Durable clothing more broadly. Canvas work pants, heavyweight wool sweaters, quality flannel shirts, oilskin or waxed canvas outerwear represents genuine value when synthetic fast fashion falls apart after a season of real use. The clothes your grandparents bought were made to last for years of hard wear. Most of what's on store shelves today is designed to last 2 seasons before it pills, fades, or simply disintegrates. During the Great Depression, clothing was mended, patched, and passed down as a matter of course. The concept of a garment being disposable is a very recent invention, and it's one that evaporates quickly when manufacturing and import supply chains stop functioning. Needle, thread, spare buttons, and the basic ability to sew a patch, these become practical skills with real-world value almost immediately when new clothing is no longer available. So there it is, 10 things that history, economics, and basic human biology all confirm become indispensable when the systems we rely on stop working. None of this requires believing that civilization is going to collapse next Tuesday. Every single item on this list has practical value right now, today, regardless of what happens. Clean water, medical supplies, food production capability, communication tools, these improve your daily life whether or not anything dramatic ever happens. The worst case if you prepare and nothing goes wrong is that you wasted a little money and learned some useful skills. That's not much of a downside. There's also a broader point worth making. Preparedness isn't paranoia. It's the baseline condition of most of human existence. For most of history, people grew their own food, treated their own injuries, preserved their own water, made their own tools, and repaired their own clothing. The version of life where you can just outsource all of that to a supply chain, a hospital, a water utility, and an Amazon warehouse. That's the anomaly. That's the brief, remarkable exception. Pretending that exception is permanent is the actual risk. The interesting thing about preparedness is that it's basically just old-fashioned self-sufficiency repackaged for an era that forgot it needed to exist. Your great-grandparents knew how to do most of this. They had hand tools, they canned food, they kept seeds, they knew which plants were edible and which weren't. Somewhere along the way, we outsourced all of it and called it progress. Gold is shiny. It photographs well and it holds value across centuries. But you can't eat it, you can't filter water with it, you can't treat an infection with it, and it won't keep your feet dry when you're 3 days from the nearest shelter. If you found this useful, give it a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who might need to hear it. And if you want more content like this, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.